These are notes for Chapter 12, Lesson 1 of your United States History textbook, The Texas Revolution. Please follow along on your notes and stop it as necessary so that you can write down any answers. Okay, so we start with the first section, American settlers moved to Texas. Number 1, the Spaniards did not form colonies like the English did. Instead, they set up three major types of settlements. The first one was missions. Missions were religious settlements to bring Christianity to the natives. And many of these were actually very successful. In fact, in Tallahassee, Florida, we have an active archaeological dig and what is now known as the Mission San Luis, where the Spaniards and the natives lived together in peace for about 50 years. The missions were very successful for the Spaniards in many ways. Letter B, they also formed presidios, or also more commonly known as forts. And forts are where soldiers would ride out to defend the priests at the mission. So you would find a presidio or a fort probably pretty close to most missions. In letter C, they also formed towns. The Spanish word for town is pueblo. And the towns, or the pueblos, were where the Spanish citizens themselves lived, grew crops, and raised cattle. And you really would not have found any natives, or at least very few of them, in the towns. Number 2, this is although missions, presidios, and towns were sometimes near each other, they each had to be able to support themselves. So you would have to have some farming happening there. There were a lot of things that had to happen there. They did not really work together to be able to support each other. Each mission, each fort, each town was self-supporting. Number 3, when Mexico gained its independence in 1821, the new government contracted with impresarios to bring settlers to Texas to defend against other countries, maybe the United States, maybe France, maybe Great Britain, wherever their boundaries were. They had to defend Texas against any other countries. Number 4, what name was given to the original American families who were recruited by Stephen Austin to settle in Texas? They were called the Old 300. You can read about this in your book. In exchange for land, these American settlers agreed to obey Mexican laws. They were no longer going to live by American laws, but by Mexican laws, because they were getting land for free. And number 6, concerned that they were losing control of American settlers, what did Mexico decree, or make a law, in 1830? They made it a law that all immigration from the United States into Texas had to be stopped because there were so many American settlers. It was really becoming more of an American settlement than it was a Mexican one. And number 7, which general took control and became dictator of Mexico in 1834? Probably the most famous one, at least as far as American history goes, is General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, sometimes just known as Santa Anna. Okay, the next section, Texans revolt against Mexico. So the first battle in the Texas War for Independence was Gonzales, and that was October of 1835. Okay, the rebels refused to give up a cannon, and within a few months they had formed an army and captured the settlements of Goliad and San Antonio. You're probably not very familiar with Goliad, but I'm certain you've heard of San Antonio. Number 2, on March 2nd, 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. This really came down to the Americans not wanting to abide by Mexican laws anymore. They really were much more interested in being Americans and living by American laws and living with American culture, including slavery. Number 3, Sam Houston was chosen to lead the Texas Army, and Stephen Austin, Stephen Austin, went to the United States to obtain troops and supplies. So let me read number 3 again. Sam Houston was chosen to lead the Texas Army, and Stephen Austin went to the United States to obtain troops and supplies. And so yes, the city of Houston is named after Sam Houston, and the city of Austin is named after Stephen Austin. Battle of the Alamo was in February of 1836. You may have heard of this. Probably one of the most famous battles in American history, and certainly the most famous in terms of the War for Texas independence. And today it's a famous tourist destination, but all you see there is not actually the fort itself, but just the chapel that was at the fort. And who led the Mexican forces and who led the American forces? Well, the Mexican forces were, of course, led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and the American forces in Texas were led by Davy Crockett, yes, that famous Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and William B. Travis. And although they lost the battle and their lives, what had the defenders of the Alamo done for Texans? They had outraged the Texans, and they made them want to fight on. So nobody lived through the battle at the Alamo. They all died. But it made the Texans want to continue to fight. Number 7, what was the Goliad Massacre? Well, this was the execution of Texans who had surrendered to Mexican troops following the battle at Goliad. And you can certainly see how basically a slaughter at the Alamo and executing a bunch of Texans who had surrendered to Mexico following that battle at Goliad, how that would incite the Texans to continue to want to fight. And so number 8, the battle cry of the Texans at the Battle of San Jacinto. They yelled, "Remember Goliad and remember the Alamo." Probably the one that's most famously remembered today is "Remember the Alamo." So number 9, how did the Texans defeat the Mexican army despite being heavily outnumbered and outmatched? Well, they launched a surprise attack, and that's certainly one way to do it, and probably the most common way. If you know that your enemy has much greater numbers than you and they are better armed, best thing to do is surprise them. And number 10, who was elected president of Texas in 1836? Well, that would be Sam Houston. He was not at the Battle of the Alamo. Number 11, what did the Texas government try to do to increase the population? They gave land grants. Number 12, what did the new settlers often bring with them? Well, you can probably guess just based on the geographic location of Texas. They often brought slaves, and then, of course, they planted cotton. Cotton is something that we will be talking about here in a few chapters, and the importance of cotton to the Southern economy. Number 13, why did President Andrew Jackson refuse to annex Texas? Very quickly after Texas became its own country, they wanted to become part of the United States. But Andrew Jackson knew that the addition of another slave state would upset the balance of slave and free states in Congress. And also, he didn't want to have any conflict with Mexico. The Texans had said, no, we're not going to become part of the United States. The United States had said, no, we don't want Texas. It's an independent country. And he knew that if he annexed Texas, or rather the United States government annexed Texas, that it could create another war with Mexico. He was not interested in that. And finally, number 14, when and why were the Texas Rangers formed? You may have heard of them. Today they are a police force. But when and why were they formed? They were formed in 1837 to defend the Texas border against Mexico and natives. Okay, so if you missed anything, certainly you can go back and watch this again. If you have any questions or you think that anything is missing, please let me know.